Welcome to the Elephant Lounge. I'm your host, Tuesday. I want to thank you for joining me. Women, justice, and propaganda. I've long been interested in true crime, as anyone who knows me knows this, and recently I thought it might be interesting to take a fresh look at an old case, one where I initially felt a bit of sympathy for the killer. Why did I feel sympathy for her? I wanted to know if my feelings were truly justified or had I been influenced by propaganda. As I have learned more about politics, it stands to reason I've learned more about the media and how they manipulate stories and push agendas. This brings me to the case of Betty Broderick. The story, how I had initially remembered, started with Betty marrying Dan. They were a young couple. Dan was going to med school. He later would move on to law school with the goal to become a malpractice attorney. Together they had 4 children, and Betty took care of the household, working multiple jobs. Also, Dan could go to school. Eventually the hard work paid off, and Dan started making real money. He was a millionaire. The family moved into a big house, took vacations, joined country clubs, and rubbed elbows with other powerful elites. Soon after, Dan hired a young assistant named Linda Coquina. He began to have an affair with her, and though Betty suspected this was happening, Dan would continue to deny it, calling her crazy. Dan finally moved out, and Linda walked in, taking over Betty's role. Though Dan left Betty with a house, he eventually took the children from her as well, leaving Betty with nothing. Betty could no longer take it, and she snapped. She went over to Dan's house and shot and killed Dan and Linda while they laid asleep in their bed. Now, listening to this version of the story, we understand that what Betty did was wrong, but you can't really help but feel sad for her. Even feminists at the time were supporting Betty. Later at her trial, Betty would also claim that she was abused by Dan. Dan was a drunk. Linda would torment her by sending her wrinkle cream and weight loss ads. Dan would always call her crazy and other names like fat, ugly, boring. Betty is able to convince many people, even me, that her hard work wasn't appreciated, and it's such a tragedy that she finally snapped. So years later, I'm thinking, is there more to this story? Is Betty really such a sympathetic character? One thing I found that made me really rethink my first impression was Betty herself. So in the 90s, Betty sat down for an interview with Oprah. She had been in prison about 10 years, a little over 10 years at this point. In this meeting, it didn't take long for me to realize that Betty is crazy. She was still living in the 80s, still angry at Dan, and while she came close to declaring responsibility, she clearly blames everyone else for what happened to her. She claims Dan turned on her. She couldn't hire a lawyer because no one would go up against the high-powered lawyer Dan Broderick. She was left with nothing and just went crazy. Betty claimed all she wanted to do that day was go over and talk to them and tell them to leave her alone. And if they didn't listen, she was going to blow her brains out in front of them. She also states that the gun just went off, and Betty insists she never wanted to kill them. Oprah asks her why she brought a gun, and Betty replies that it made sense to her, and it still makes sense to this day. Clearly, Oprah was incredulous to this statement and later asked if Betty had remorse. Betty stated that since she never made the decision to kill Dan and Linda, she can't have remorse for a decision she never made. All of this comes across as a woman making endless excuses, but this is expected from a narcissist. Yes, Betty was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder along with histrionic disorder. Once we dive a bit further into the story, more things seem to make sense. Dan and Betty's daughter confirm that Betty is a difficult person. She dismisses claims that her father was an alcoholic and says her parents were never this perfect couple that Betty would like to portray. Friends of Dan have also stated that on their wedding night, Betty asked for a divorce and that throughout the marriage she would continue saying she wanted a divorce. The children confirm this, and they also state that the two argued constantly. According to all I have read, it seems that Betty went to visit Dan's office on his 39th birthday to surprise him so the two could celebrate. When she arrived, Dan's secretary told her Dan had gone to lunch with his assistant, Linda. Betty decided to wait inside his office, only to find decorations and a partially eaten cake. Dan never came back to the office. Furious, suspicious of Dan's infidelity, Betty ran home, gathered Dan's clothes, only to set them on fire. Another thing I was unaware of was the fact that when Dan had finally moved out, Betty would break into his home, doing so several times, damaging his property, spray painting paint on his walls, and repeatedly left angry voice messages that continued until the day the two were murdered. Dan also did not initially take the children. In fact, after he left, Betty had decided to methodically drop the children on his doorstep one by one, even when he wasn't home. She thought that by doing this, Dan would realize how difficult it was to take care of the family, and this backfired when Dan filed for full custody. Betty went and purchased a home with an ocean view valued at $650,000, compliments of Dan. He volunteered to pay her monthly, and I believe that was around $9,000. She also had 2 vehicles. After 4 years, their divorce finally happened, and Betty was awarded $16,000 per month until she remarried. When Dan and Linda decided to move into another home together, Betty went over to their home and rammed her truck through the front of their home. She would try to downplay this event by claiming she only hit their door, but the entire frame was smashed in and substantial damage was done. This resulted in her arrest and 3 days in psychiatric care. Now, there is a TV movie I found starring Meredith Baxter called A Woman Scorned, the Betty Broderick story. This story portrays Betty in a more realistic manner. It may describe Dan as being too mild. It seems as though both of them may have antagonized one another, but there definitely seems to be an all or nothing presented in this case. Either Dan is a monster or Betty is. The reality may be a bit of something in between, but ultimately it was Betty who was out of control. This is confirmed by family and friends. The prosecutor in Betty's case states she had repeatedly tried to confirm the claims of abuse by Betty. Ultimately, nothing could be, and her accusations in many cases just turned out to be outright lies. The assertion that Linda had sent her wrinkle cream and diet ads could be valid, but I personally could not find anything that absolutely confirmed this to be a fact. Betty could have sent those items to herself, knowing how erratic she is. That's a possibility. Through all the claims, the only ones that were backed up with physical evidence are the ones where Betty is causing damage and wreaking havoc upon Dan and Linda. One serious claim that Betty has made over the years is that she couldn't find an attorney to represent her because no one wanted to go up against Dan. But the problem here is Dan was a malpractice attorney. He had to hire his own divorce attorney. Many lawyers would have taken her case. It seems as though she went through about 5 different attorneys, and it was claimed she was too difficult to work with. Not every attorney knew Dan or anything about him. Her claim was merely ludicrous and perhaps fueled by paranoia. A significant source of evidence used at trial were those phone messages. Betty called Dan and Linda obsessively, leaving threatening phone messages. One even stated she was going to kill him. One of the most impacting recordings involved her young son, who was 11 at the time, picking up the phone, pleading with his mother to stop speaking in such a cruel manner. At one point, the boy said, "All you care about is your stupid money. You want everything. You want all the kids, all the money to get rid of Linda, and it's not going to work, Mom. You've been mad long enough." She replied, "No, I haven't. There's more." Betty also kept a diary where she expressed her frustrations and expressed a desire to kill Dan. She even went so far as to tell her children she wanted Dan dead and had purchased a gun. Their daughter's testimony contradicts other claims Betty made. She stated Dan was not violent, and it was Betty who would throw things at him, and later she would steal items from their home. That time, Betty crashed their home with her truck. Her children were inside. Now is the time we need to ask what kind of a caring mother would dare think of doing such a thing with her own children inside the home. Disgusting. She could have killed them, essentially. She was so obsessed with her own needs and her own anger that her children's lives did not matter. Did Betty have a right to be angry? Sure. Of course she did. Did Dan and Linda do awful things to her? It is possible. But where's the evidence? Most any of the information that we have to confirm these claims all come from Betty herself. This all leads up to me asking the question, what if Betty were a man? If Betty had been a jilted husband who acted in the same manner, would anyone be out there offering up great heaps of sympathy? Think about a man being in a bad marriage, being cheated on, dropping his children off at his wife's door, harassing, destroying her property repeatedly. He continually ignores restraining orders, tormenting the children, leaving obscene phone messages constantly, blaming everything on the ex-wife, expressing a desire to kill her, and finally carrying out that wicked deed. Would anyone say the victims deserved it? I'm not so sure they would. So what about the media? Would anyone in the media be so charitable towards a man? This isn't to say that everyone in the press was biased towards Betty. They weren't. But it is interesting that there were many out there who were somewhat sympathetic toward Betty. They downplayed her actions while hyping up actions Dan took in a negative way. In Betty's case, however, you find many articles, videos. Look at the comments. Hundreds of people saying things like, well, what she did was wrong, but I understand. Dan and Linda tortured her and put her over the edge. In more extreme expressions, you read things like, Linda was a whore, she deserved it. I've seen it everywhere. Before I looked further into this, I kind of thought the same thing. She did wrong, but I get it, I understand. But when you really think about it, you have to ask, where does this come from? If a person can step back and look objectively at all the facts of this case, it's challenging to understand how one could possibly make such a ridiculous inference. In a more truthful light, Betty was a controlling monster who somehow came to the conclusion that Dan owed her everything. She didn't help Dan because she was a doting wife and a loving mother. She helped Dan because he was her potential cash cow. He was going to medical school. She viewed him as a man with potential who could eventually give her the materialistic things she ultimately desired. When Dan had enough of her and he finally left, she gave herself a license to treat him and Linda any nasty way she chose, and her children ended up just being pawns for her. Betty's first trial resulted in a mistrial. 2 jurors held out, and one was quoted as saying, I just don't know why it took her so long. Now, her second trial finally did result in her being convicted, but only with second-degree murder, which is a bit surprising considering the evidence seems to suggest that their deaths were very much indeed planned. Again, bias. And it's likely because Betty is a woman. If a man had announced to his children he wanted their mother dead and wrote this in his diary and had purchased a gun, stole a key to his ex-wife's house from his own daughter, and then eventually killed his ex-wife and now husband and new husband, I do believe that man would be found guilty of first-degree murder. It's hard to imagine any jury saying, well, he didn't mean to do it. So far, Betty has been denied parole 2 times. Her children are split on whether she should be released. 2 of them claim she should be. The other two argue that she still has no genuine remorse. You can watch part of her first parole hearing on YouTube. I will include that on my blog. She is still very much living in the 80s, and she's still angry with Dan. Nothing is really Betty's fault. It's everyone else who did her wrong. In Betty's world, she shouldn't be responsible for her actions. Even though she claims that she is, she always finds a way of contradicting this. It won't be until 2022 till she is up for parole again. It's not likely she will ever change. She is currently 71 years old. In a world where we're constantly reminded that men and women are equal, I continue to see vast differences in the way men and women are treated as it pertains to our justice system. Men who are abused are ignored, and even when they are met with their untimely death, people find ways of degrading that man. Instead, sympathy is given toward their abuser. Why should a woman be treated any differently unless we acknowledge that men and women are not the same? In almost every famous murder case we see a woman involved, there's always a jury member or there are supporters who refuse to treat that woman in an equal way. Jodi Arias is an example of a woman who was indeed hated for the murder of Travis Alexander, but during her first sentencing phase, one man decided she didn't deserve the death penalty, a sentence that most assuredly would have been agreed upon if Jodi were a man. Again, in her second sentencing phase, it would be a woman who held out for the death penalty. Casey Anthony walked out of court a free woman for killing her own child. Pamela Smart had a trial where her own words confirmed her involvement in encouraging her teen lover to kill her husband. While she was sentenced to life, she has a horde of people who actually support her and believe she's innocent. Do people feel this way because these are their true feelings, or have these people been influenced by media bias? Should women be treated differently in our court systems? Do we see a problem here? It seems that many in society definitely believe this to be true. Should this be the case, then how should women be allowed to demand equality when it comes to other areas of our lives? This type of contradiction, it needs to be rectified. Equality of opportunities includes equality of responsibility. This is not to say that women who are genuinely in abusive relationships should be disregarded. Women who are abused can indeed become psychologically damaged. Men can be abused as well. Then there are cases where we have both parties who end up hurting each other through abuse. Each case must be considered, and we allow that to occur inside our courtrooms. And while I can appreciate media attention to a variety of these murder cases, as individuals who consume these stories, we need to be aware that unless we look deeper, it's more than likely we are only absorbing part of the story. So what do you guys ultimately think? Are women and men equal? Should they be treated differently under the law? It seems as though men and women are being treated unequal under the law. Is that right? Is that fair? How do we fix this? How do we get people to look at cases where a woman is involved and to help them think about these cases as they would for a man? I would like to believe that a majority of people do believe in the equality of men and women, but there is a huge contradiction here. And again, I find it very difficult that if Betty were a man, given everything that happened, everything Dan did was a reaction to the abuse that was perpetrated by Betty. How can anyone turn around and say, well, they deserve what they get? Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time.